Hi everybody, I hope you all are well. I've been doing these classes for, I think it's about close to 10 years now. And I never in my entire life thought that I would be sitting here and talking to a camera, being able to reach anybody all over South Africa, in actual fact, all over the world. This is as new of a journey for me as what it is for each and every one of you. Well, some of you have been on the call for quite a while, but this is a new journey, just as it's a brand new journey for me as well. And yeah, technology's never been my strong suit, so I'm figuring this out. With every lesson that I'm going to be recording, I'm going to figure it out, and I already know that the sound will get better and the imagery will get better with time as I learn more and more things about how to record these videos properly. What I do know how to do is I can at least give the class. I mean, it's not my first rodeo on that one, but it is the first time where I'm not in an actual room with everybody sitting around tables or at desks asking questions, and that propels the lesson forward. And I know that there will be a chance and we'll have like video calls and conferences, and there's going to be the WhatsApp group for all of that. But still, this is so new to me. So I would first and foremost, before I even start with this lesson, I would just really, really like to thank everybody and say thank you for embarking on this brand new journey with me. Thank you for walking with me every step of the way. And honestly, it's an honor and a privilege to go on this journey with each and every one of you as well. So yes, so welcome to the House of Serendipity Academy. I am so honored to be here. I'm so honored to speak to each and every one of you. And I'm so excited for this year ahead as we are going to delve through this pagan course, and we're starting just with the concept of what paganism is, or what being a pagan means, if that's going to be your preferred label, but also just to see where the roots of all of this spirituality starts, and moving all the way from there into all of the fun stuff like tarot reading and black mirror readings, all of the way downwards towards all of the healing aspects, when we'll be studying chakras, and we're going to be studying herbology, and we're going into astrology as well. There's just so many fun subjects lumped in together with the history that we've got, and all of the facts and the philosophies and everything that we can talk about and discuss over the next few months. So welcome to your new spiritual journey. And yes, thank you for being with me on my technological journey, but it's also a very big spiritual journey for me as well. So I am going to give a lecture now, and this will be on phase 1, lesson 1 of the House of Serendipity Academy's degree course. And I don't know if all of you printed out your lessons, have read through it maybe already. I've got mine printed out. That way I can keep track of where I am in the lesson. And yeah, usually I would say stop me at any time and ask a question. This time I'm going to tell you, pause the video, have a notebook ready, write down your question. Don't forget it. There's no such thing as a simple or stupid question. You can spam us on the WhatsApp group. I'll get to that. I'll answer everybody on there. What I don't answer, bigger concepts, we'll discuss later this week in a nice video chat. For those who can't tune in, we're going to record that, so recording of the chat will be available as well. So let's start with what pagan means. And here we're looking at the actual word. Now, it's I would like to start first that there is a difference between the translation of a word, which is usually its definition or meaning at a certain time in the past. And then we do have the meaning of the word. The meaning of the word is what it is. Whereas the definition of the word is actually the words that we would use to describe what it is defined at a certain point in time, or by a certain culture, by a certain group of people. So let's dive in. I'm going to every now and again look down on the page, make sure I'm on the right spot as I guide you guys through this lesson, and I'm so excited to be here. So yes. So first of all, we need to go back a millennia or two, and we're going to start with a man named Aristotle. And the reason why I'm bringing him up is not because he particularly meant that much within paganism itself, but because this man wrote 8 books. And these books were just full of words that he was using doing his other writing. And what I love about this is the 8 books that he wrote was just stating certain words and what he meant when he was using that word, because he understood that a word could change its meaning or its definition depending on where it was used, the physical location, the culture that it was used, the context that it was used in, and then also the timeline. He understood that 50 years ago, a certain word didn't necessarily mean the same that it meant in his timeline. And he also understood that with evolution of words in 100 or 200 or 500 years' time, the word might have gone through multiple evolutions, meaning something completely different than what he meant when he wrote down a certain piece. And he wanted everybody to actually understand what he was saying within the context that he was saying it. And this is very important to keep in mind when we're working with any type of word, and especially words like pagan, that today would mean the name of almost a religion, but it still has got so many different definitions that we do need to keep in account. And depending on the context that you want to use this word in, the definition would change completely. And here I would like to go on a tangent just a little bit away from the lesson, and I want to explore a more modern word that has gone through, over the last 50 to 70 years, this word has gone through such a big evolution that what its actual definition was isn't even closely related to the way that it is being used today. So excuse the French, but I'm going to use the word bitch. And the word bitch translates to a female dog. And when we're looking at the word in that context, it is but a female dog. And if we rewind 70, 80 years, that's all it meant. It was its meaning, it was its definition, as well as its translation. Then we fast forward here towards the 1980s, and by this time the word has already taken on a complete new meaning, and it becomes a derogatory slur towards a woman. So immediately it's gone so far away, and originally you can see how the meaning changed with wanting, putting a dog down. A dog is lower than humans, and the concept there. So you're putting a woman on that level by using the term this way. Then we fast forward again a few years, and now it's not this derogatory cuss word anymore, because the word has now been reclaimed. Now, being a bitch is a powerful word. It speaks about a woman who has power, who doesn't take nonsense from anybody. The word's been actually reclaimed completely. And when we look at the meaning and definition today, and we look at people running around and they're wearing t-shirts that's got the word bitch on it, and maybe it could spell out words like beautiful, intelligent, tender, caring, honey on the t-shirt, we realize that the word has moved away from its original meaning and definition, and it's a word that hasn't evolved over such a long period that we can't remember the original meaning. We still know what it originally meant, but you will very rarely today hear somebody talking about a bitch as a female dog. They would rather refer to a female dog, whereas bitch is a word completely on its own now. It's moved away from its original definition, it's moved away from its original meaning, and all we have left is its original translation towards the time. And within that, we can find what it meant at the time, but it doesn't necessarily mean that anymore. And we see the exact same thing happening to pagan over the course of about 2,000 years. And we go into a completely different definition, meaning, and so forth. So let's delve into the actual lesson and look at invading the etymology of the word pagan throughout time. Now, if we go back to the most simplistic form of where we find the term pagan, we find that the word pagan just translates to the word country dweller. And for the time it meant country dweller, one dwelling in the country. But today we can't use it that way anymore. We can't go and say that pagan means country dweller, because you get pagans in the cities. They're not necessarily on farms. The word pagan defines a big umbrella term. Well, it has become a big umbrella term defining many different things in today's day and age. So to go back to its original translation would just be silly at this point. But it is good to look at the meaning of the word pagan throughout history. And if we go back and we go to page 2, for those who are following, right at the top we'll find the 1st century BCE. Now this is just over 2,000 years ago, and in Latin we find the word paganere, and it means to fix or to fasten, and it originally refers to physical markers or boundaries. So when we look at the word, the root of the word pagan here, we're looking at a certain district, at a place that has physical markers. Now, this would not be a city, because a city at this point in time, a city like Rome, a city like Athens, even the cities in Egypt like Alexandria, Cairo at the time, they're constantly expanding. You can't actually limit them by markers at all. But the small villages, they're not expanding. Yes, there's new births and such, but a lot of those people move away towards the cities, and the small villages remain small villages. So yes, they would be considered Hungary, and also farmland, any farmland, because a farmland has got markers. It cannot extend beyond those markers. So at this point, the word's root itself only means a certain district, a certain place. It's a geographical placement at this point. Then we need to, just forward from BCE, we go to the 1st century CE. So it's only 200 years later. And the word itself has changed because the language changed. It changed from Latin to Classic Latin. Yes, the two are closely related, and yet the two are very different. We've got a new system here in place. We've got a new governmental system in place. We see the rise of democracy coming here. And now the word has changed to pagus. And at this point, it's not just a place that is fixed in place. Now it actually states that it is a rural district. It is farmland. It is a small village. It's not just the suggestion of it. It is that definitely. And it is also, to a certain extent, all of what happens within this district. So let's say, for instance, it's crops being grown, it would be referred to Pagus crops. The people from Pagus would be the people living there. Pagus would be the rural district. So rural people, rural district, rural crops. It's almost like we would say organic vegetables now, because that farm is organic and the people living there is organic. So it would have very much a similar idea there. Then we fast forward to the 4th and 5th century. And by this point, Classic Latin is dying down and we get a language known as Late Latin. Late Latin, very similar to what we have today when we are speaking about Latin. And we see the word has evolved again. From Pagus, it has evolved to Paganus. And Paganus now shifts from a geographical to a demographical connotation. And instead of talking about a certain district, we are now actually talking about a villager or a rustic, a person who comes from a rural place or who lives in a rural place. So now we're at the point where it's actually defining a certain type of person or a certain person, so to speak. And then we move from there. By the time that we get to the 11th to 15th century, now this is a huge jump. This is almost 2,000 years. We're going from the year 400, all of the way up to about the 1400s. And by this time, it means locally. We're back to the old word pagus, meaning locally, and it now focuses on a regional identity. And it's this regional identity that we're interested in. Now, when we start looking through these and we go back all of these years, we're looking at, from a spiritual connotation, we're also looking at a timeline where cities are evolving. So when they were speaking about these ancient pagans, using these words like Pagus or Paganus, they were speaking about a person who was usually illiterate. We were talking about a person who was quite traditional, who believed in the sun and the moon and the stars and the seasons and the rain. Because you know what? They understood that we needed the sun's rays to make the crops grow. They understood they needed to wait for the water to fall from the heavens in order to make the crops grow. They waited for certain events before they harvested, before they planted. So while the cities and civilization was evolving at a rapid pace, they also started introducing formalized religion. And formalized religion was introduced in very much at the same time as the idea of democracy, because at this point they also need to get taxes. They need to make laws, true laws for the first time within a government setting, and you're looking at the Senate of Rome. So for this, how do you get people to actually obey the laws? You bring it in as a religious practice as well. So government and religion becomes one. It is actually one right at the beginning. The head of the Senate would be the emperor, who would also be known as the Holy Roman Emperor, because he would also be the head of the church. Think of him as a pope-like figure of what we know today. So head of the church would also be kind of the president, so to speak, or the king, the emperor. And they go towards your rural areas and they do try and convert. And at this point, there's a lot of people going like, wait, no, hang on. This is the way that we've always done it. We're not going to change that all of a sudden because you're making new laws, because you're going into democracy. In actual fact, these farmers knew little about democracy, about government. They were living their way for centuries upon centuries before this new system started coming into place. They were interested in only one thing, being traditional and doing things the way that it's always been done. And this is where we start speaking about the pagans as the rural ones. They are the illiterate ones, the ones who didn't want to change, the ones that didn't want to grow with the time. Whereas we were looking at your civilized places, your cities, and they were going like, no, we need to change, we need to change. And you had these rural people who said, no, sorry, we're not. So now you get civilians, city dwellers, and you get country dwellers, you get your pagans. And that is where the word starts changing from just a geographical place and somebody who dwells in the country to actually meaning something. And at this point, it's meaning somebody who doesn't believe, somebody who believes their own thing, who is there on their own, going on with their traditions of planting and harvesting and praying for the moon and the sun and all of those things. But now, sorry, need to drink something every so often. I talk a lot. Yeah. So, when we then start looking at the multiple faces of the word pagan, we come about a few different definitions given to it at different timelines by different societies or cultures. So first we need to look at the academic definition of the word pagan. And that is something that we just went through. It's something that's rooted very much in the etymology of the word itself, how it evolved, how the word changed, and what it translated to at that point of time. But then we need to look at the Abrahamic definition. And this is a definition that still stands today. Now see, at the point where Christianity, Muslim, the Jewish religions are taking over the world, and they become the big formalized religions, they need to define what pagans are. Well, anybody who doesn't want to convert and believe in what they believe. And they're sitting with a huge problem here because you've got people here that goes like, no, I'm not interested in praying to your God. Your God has done nothing for me. But you know what? The heavens bring waters, and that's the tears of the goddess, and that makes the crop grow. And the God is the sun, and he brings rays, so that makes the crop grow. They can see what happens from what they pray to. And from an Abrahamic definition standpoint, the Abrahamic religions go towards the Abrahamic doctrine, and they go like, well, in that case, the majority of people that do not want to believe what we are selling them, what we want them to believe, are rural people. They are illiterate. They are pagans. Therefore, we're going to put a connotation and a definition to the word pagan. And we're going to say a pagan is anybody who does not espouse to Abrahamic doctrine. And this works quite well for them, because in the cities at this point as well, there's certain people going like, certain things in the Bible, Torah, Quran, in any of these holy books that's being used, doesn't make sense to them. They don't fully agree with it. They might agree more with the idea of living closer to the land. And these are the philosophers of the time. These are the scientists of the time, and they start proving things, and they move away from organized religion as well. So immediately they become pagans too. So now it's not just showing a rural district or a country dweller or a farmer that's kind of stuck in his ways and doing things the way he's always done it. Now it refers to anybody who does not want to believe what a certain religion believes, what a certain doctrine tells them to believe. And now it's not just the rural farmer anymore. Now people from India, the Hindus, from Asia, the Buddhists and such, all of them get lumped into this big umbrella term called pagan. So now it becomes quite a bit of a soup to understand what the word pagan means. Because even though they gave it a definition and they said, well, it's anything that's not this. But in actual fact, Abrahamic religion never went and defined what being a pagan means. They only defined what it doesn't mean. And what it doesn't mean is it's anybody who doesn't espouse to Abrahamic doctrine. But what they're doing, they're not considered in the definition. So even though we do look at this as a definition, and we do look at it as a meaning, it's actually an anti-definition of what the word means. And that is actually the definition that's been used to define the word for the better part of the last millennia. Then we need to go to what paganism truly means, what it is defined as by the people calling themselves pagan. And this is probably the most important definition that there is of this word. Because who better to define what the word pagan means than somebody who would actually title and label themselves as a pagan. Now, to do this, we need to go back to the 4th to the 13th century, 4th century BC to the 13th century AD. And to go back to that timeline, we need to look at how these people were living. The people calling themselves pagans, country dwellers, were the same people calling themselves heathens. Somebody who dwells near the hearth. Somebody, and when they meant hearth, they didn't mean that they stayed around the kitchen or the hearth the whole time. The hearth was seen as the soul of the house. It was seen as the tradition within the house. When we look at houses of this timeline, it usually only had 2 rooms. You had the big bedroom area, which was living room, bedroom, all of that together, and you had the kitchen area. That's it. That was a house. That was the structure. But all of the traditions actually happened in the kitchen area. That's where you sat down and ate. That is where heirlooms were kept, the big black pots and the spoons that belonged to grandmother. All of that was there. That's where the book was kept. The only book that they used, basically, which was a cookbook. And a book full of remedies, and a book maybe having a picture of a herb, and that was for breaking a fever. You need to remember a lot of these people were illiterate, yes, but there was usually somebody who could read their own ancient language a little bit, or they used pictures and such. So the kitchen, the hearth, was the soul of the family. It had the tradition of the family. And that is why these people happily call themselves a pagan, because it meant country dweller. It meant one who dwelt near the hearth as well. They were heathens. They kept to their own tradition. But it didn't stay with that. Since the Abrahamic definition started coming in, and we had people in the cities now also being referred to as pagans, those city folk went like, whoa. You can't just call me a pagan. I'm not illiterate. I don't work a farm. I'm not from a rural setting. I'm a scientist. I'm a philosopher. I just believe in something differently than you believe. I've got an actual nature-based belief system, whereas the old pagans, the ones from farms, they didn't have an organized belief system. Yes, they had a ritual. Yes, they said, thank you for the rain that came. Thank you for the harvest season that just ended. And they did it for practical reasons as well. So yes, they did honor, they did worship, they did say thank you to the earth for the bounty that they have received. But they also didn't have refrigerators. So everybody came together, they shared all of the food, anything that couldn't be preserved or pickled or kept for the next 3 months or 6 months had to be eaten. So it was a feast. It was a brilliant feast. The people in the cities weren't concerned with that part. They were more concerned with the part that was energy, that was scientific in nature. They wanted to prove that they didn't need the court physician, to do bloodletting on them to get rid of a migraine. They wanted to put lavender in their pillowcase, which was a completely different concept, and they wanted to prove that that worked so that that could become a part of their belief system, of their way of life. They wanted to define the ideas of the ancient gods and goddesses within a philosophical point of view. So yes. Okay, so when we start looking at these city folk that started to define their practices different and separate themselves from the country dwellers, we also see a new term, a new label popping up in the scriptures of the time. And that is, if we go to page 4 on the lesson, you'll see the word neo-pagan. And the prefix neo meaning new in Greek. And at this point, the philosophers go and they say, okay, right, we need a new name. Yes, we are basing a lot of our practices and our understanding and our philosophical ideas, and we're basing a lot of our scientific ideas on the ways that the pagans, the country dwellers, are doing things. But we are not country dwellers. We don't live in the same manner. We don't do things in the same manner. We are more organized. We have more of a belief system rather than just a tradition. So at this point, they start calling themselves and they get categorized as neo-pagans. And this was a very easy way to do things. So you had your pagans, country dwellers, traditional folk, probably still illiterate, working the land, they're farmers, and now you've got your neo-pagans, and they're more living in the cities, and they say, well, I define as a neo-pagan because of my belief system, because of how I do things on a day-to-day basis. Now today, we do not see the word neo-pagan too much. There is 2 reasons for this. Number 1 is the lack of understanding of the word neo-pagan. They look at the prefix and they see neo as new. And the moment that people see the new part of it, they say, no, but I'm doing it in the old ancient way. By today's standards, being a neo-pagan is a concept that is more than 1,000 years old. It is actually an ancient way. Yet, there's another reason. The second reason is the New Age movement, something that came about in the late 50s, early 1960s. It started growing momentum, went through the 60s, 70s, and we start getting the concept of hippies and free love. We get the concept of oracle cards, love, light, and healing, suppressing any type of a shadow side, dark side, negative side, so to speak. And a lot of pagans believe in a duality of both good and bad. We believe in the concept of light and dark. There always needs to be a balance. For every action, there needs to be an opposite and equal reaction as well. So we're seeing a lot of that happening, and these pagans are going like, I don't want the new there because I don't want to be associated with the New Age movement, which is something completely different. It's more of an ideology rather than a way of life or a set of beliefs or practices. So I would like to separate myself from that, which is why the word neo-pagan isn't being used quite as much as what it maybe should be used, because it is a better definition. Well, the word itself has a much closer definition to what we do today than what the word pagan would have. But yes, once again, so in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, the word neo-pagan starts slowly falling away and gets replaced with a word that's older than that, which is just pagan. And again, the definitions change, the meaning changes. So I would just like to add here for some clarity. When the Greeks tackled the complexities of the entire pagan identity at the time, they then explored and they said, okay, we've got pagan communities, which is the root word where it came from. That's a district. That's a village that lives in a certain manner, lives by their own traditions. Then we had pagans who were the country folk, more the farmers, people who lived by the land. And now all of a sudden we had neo-pagans or new pagans who was nature-based believers. They believed in nature, they believed in attuning themselves to nature, and they believed that the harmony of living in nature could bring about ideas like healing and divination, the concepts of that would later be known as psychology. At the time it was just known as philosophy, and that could give you a better idea of your ancient roots, what we call history today. It was geology as well, because these people were believing that the earth was round, it wasn't flat anymore, and that they came up with revolutionary ideas at the time. They were pushing the boundaries quite far. So now it is essential to remember that during this timeline, the term pagan was just a country dweller. The only other thing that it was a secondary definition that was just, well, anybody who doesn't espouse the Abrahamic doctrine. So the creation of neo-pagan served as a vital distinction, setting apart the country dwellers from the nature-based believers. So when we start looking at neo-pagan, the term neo-pagan, that much more comes to the true significance of the pagan identity of what we do have today. Now, we need to look, we're still on page 4. For anybody who is following on the page, of course, you can watch this video without looking at the pages, and maybe look at the pages separately, maybe just take notes for the moment. That is all completely up to you. So, now, when we look at neo-paganism in the modern era and its evolution and growth, we are looking at people who have also added something else to their belief system or their way of life and their spirituality, which is called witchcraft. Now, the term witchcraft is actually much newer than what the term pagan or neo-pagan is, yet the definition of the idea of witchcraft predates the idea of paganism or neo-pagan. When we're looking at the word witchcraft, witch meaning wise one in Latin, craft, well, that's very much self-explanatory. The word itself means very much the same thing that it meant 2,000 years ago. We get to the term the craft of the wise ones. That would be the tradition, the foundation of what this word actually means. And it makes sense. It makes sense. If the neo-pagans and even the farmers at the time, the country dwellers, were looking at the world around them, understanding that certain herbs were for certain ailments, if they already started understanding that certain cycles and seasons of the earth impacted crops and harvests and all of that, we are looking at people who would have been considered wise, not necessarily always knowledgeable, not in terms of history and mathematics and such, but they had a wisdom. And that was their craft. Their craft was using this wisdom in their day-to-day lives, to recognize it and use it for the betterment of themselves and everybody around them. So we're looking at now neo-pagans bring in the term witchcraft, and they say, okay, being a pagan is still an umbrella term. I accept the definition, the Abrahamic definition, that I do not espouse the Abrahamic doctrine, but I want to define myself even more. And by defining, I say that my craft is the craft of the wise ones. I'm doing things in a certain manner which is either scientific, but it is still old knowledge. So immediately we start getting a different definition within a different definition, because now we have a label or a practice within a label. And at this point as well, we see a major shift in the idea, because now it's something that's established. Paganism is now established, and within paganism you've got witchcraft, which means now you have people teaching others. At the same time, you've got students wanting to learn, and you see the evolution and the development of covens and temples and such springing up and springing forth. And as this happens, travel also becomes a thing. Traveling becomes more accessible. Books are being written. By the 1400s, we've got the printing press, and knowledge is spreading all over the world. And this is the beauty of pagan, because being pagan, part of the newer definition is to incorporate truths from every culture, from every religion, from all around the world. Now, as the word pagan evolved over centuries, the practice, the witchcraft within it, had to evolve as well. Now, as pagans began to travel and knowledge became more readily available at the time, they started incorporating foreign concepts into their own beliefs. Now, when we're looking at paganism as a whole, we usually look at the area that we today know as Italy. We're looking at it from there all of the way down to Spain. So we're looking at the entirety of Europe, so to speak. And at this point, they are discovering places like Asia, India. They are going into places like the UK, what we know as the UK today, Ireland, Scotland, England. And there they meet different tribes, different people, different cultures, and they bring those cultures home. So all of a sudden, we've got this inclusion of foreign concepts like chakras, for instance, the concept of karma, and it gets introduced and gets taken into the idea of paganism once they can prove that it works. So from Japan, we get Reiki later years. The concepts of crystals becomes more of a thing. More of the herbal remedies come from the UK, from the Celts and such. Folklore starts interchanging between different cultures. And so we get an accumulation of a lot of different cultures, and we get a craft that is constantly evolving. And as it's evolving, it's also leaving behind certain practices that doesn't make sense anymore. That's not necessarily relevant anymore. For instance, we get to a point where it's not believed that the earth is flat anymore. Now the earth is round, and that gets incorporated where a lot of your major religions and even your old pagans, your farmers, still believe the earth's flat. We still have old farmers running oxen through fire to try and purify it, and still doing animal sacrifice, which today we look at it and we go like, oh, it's archaic. And at this point, your neo-pagans look at it and think the exact same thing. They think this is unnecessary. We don't have to do it this way. There must be another way to do it. So we see an evolution of the craft within paganism itself. And with that, the definition of the idea of paganism changes again. And it changes again. Every time something new is incorporated, it changes. And that actually becomes the definition of being pagan, and especially being an eclectic pagan, because it opens up the world and says, take in what is the truth, seek the truth, take it in, use it. If you were to find out that that truth is not a truth anymore because something else has been proven, you are allowed to discard it and take in the new truth. This way, it never becomes stagnant. It never becomes detrimental. It never dies out. It is constantly changing. It is constantly evolving. And it is constantly taking on new concepts which change our way of thinking, which keeps us on a spiritual growth path instead of keeping with old family traditions, or let's say just a sacred book, which is rooted in the past, which is stagnant, and doesn't necessarily give any space for further growth beyond what is written down or what has been passed down through the generations, because it needs to stay as is within those contexts. So, when we look at the contrast, paganism and neo-paganism itself, and what some are now actually calling pagan metaphysics, which is actually a brilliant term because that is what we're doing, it's metaphysics. And they've embraced change and growth, evolving into a dynamic and inclusive spiritual path. Now we can add voodoo practices if we'd like. We can add an idea that you read in a fiction book if you can feel it resonating as the truth. It can be a quote from Marilyn Monroe if you want it to be. And if that means so much to you, if that defines what is a part of your path, what you feel is the truth, if it's a moral value that you hold dear, there is no rule that says that you cannot enter it into your belief system, into your path, into your sacred path as a value, as a moral value, as something important, as a sacred text. You can add it. Once you find new scientific knowledge, you may add it. If you find a recipe for a new way to make a cough syrup, that is allowed to be added as well. There's absolutely no restrictions, which I actually find ironic because the root of the word pagan is to fix or fasten. It's a certain district. It's something limited by markers, where when we look at the word pagan today, there's no limits. There's no markers, and there's actually no boundaries at all. It's open to be whatever you need it to be to grow and to be a better person and to go on this spiritual journey, which is life. So, we are not scared by melding beliefs from different cultures, different societies, different times. We are done with the days of animal sacrifice. We are done with the days of believing in flat earth theory. That does not serve us because it doesn't work, because it's not a truth. But there's still a limitless truth and a limitless amount of practices out there in the world that we can incorporate and help ourselves to grow in this world. And that is what being a pagan is all about. Yes, we have dropped the neo prefix. Yes, some people do still use it. Some people are dropping the word witchcraft and replacing that with metaphysics. The most people nowadays use the word pagan, but with a capital P, because now it shows what I believe in. And that is all fine, because if the word pagan speaks to your heart, claim it with pride. If the word neo-pagan resonates with your spirit, embrace it. If neither label fits, create your own, or just have no label. Yes, having a label can be important sometimes. Some people might need it. Not everybody does. It's up to you to label yourself. It's up to you to decide what you want to call your spiritual journey. It's up to you to do whatever you would like to do as long as it brings forth spiritual growth. I'm here to give you some knowledge. It's up to you to use your wisdom to take that knowledge, to incorporate it into your life and to make something wonderful out of it. So yes, be whatever you're comfortable with being. Remember that the beauty of modern spirituality lies in its diversity as well as its inclusivity. Because even though we can all sit here and I can give this lesson and this lecture and we can all be studying the same thing, we all have a different takeaway. We are inclusive of one another, but we are unique in the way that we think. Therefore, our belief system will be totally unique as well, even if we're all doing the exact same thing. So celebrate your individuality, honor the path of others, and as we weave together a rich and vibrant tapestry of spiritual expression. And yes, that's what paganism is. It's not just a piece of yarn. It's all of the yarns together in one strategy. Okay, now if everybody would like to maybe join me on page 7, I have put in here some questions to ponder after you do this lesson, and you're welcome to maybe answer these in a journal, think about it, chat about it maybe on our WhatsApp group. Give us your ideas around this. So the first question is, how has the meaning of the word pagan evolved over time? Give us your idea. I would love to know how you see it. What is your personal view on the evolution of the word pagan and the definition thereof? Then, one that I really do enjoy of these questions is, how do individuals define their spiritual identity and what factors influence their choices? I think that's an extremely personal, thought-provoking question where everybody will come up with a completely different concept. And then I'm going to jump to number 8. What are the benefits and drawbacks of merging different spiritual traditions? I would love to hear each and every one of your opinions on this. So there is 8 questions. I'm not going to bore you with reading them all. I mean, you've got it there. And think about it. Maybe you've got one of them that you would like to talk about. Maybe you've got some other questions because of this lesson that you feel that I maybe haven't covered, haven't answered yet. So put that for us on the WhatsApp group that you will be added to. And if you do have some answers on these questions, because some of them I would love to know your opinion on, please put the question in there, right there, what you would like to say. You don't need to answer all of them. There might only be one that really resonates with you, but please share with us. It would be lovely to hear everybody share. And then on page 8, there is a little pop quiz. It's just to test your own knowledge of what we've just discussed and what you have learned. I know that I work a little bit better if I've got a little pop quiz and I can write it in and then check my answers, and that's actually one of the ways that I like to study. I know there's certain people who prefer to study like this, listening to a lecture. Some people just like to read through something. They've got photogenic memories. So everybody learns in a different way as well, studies in a different way. So I do try and incorporate every single way in here, and I hope that that serves you well. So on the next videos, I'm going to see you for the meditation part, the energy part, and of course, the really fun part, which is divination. So I hope you have a wonderful day or evening whenever you're watching this video. And yes, I'll see you in the next video. Blessed be.